On today's episode of Behind the Mic, they were again going to make history once again with their first crew launching into space. If this mission goes well, SpaceX will have a giant leap in the space race as we know it today, and they will continue to evolve and change the industry for the better. Yo. Welcome back to the podcast, and thank you for joining me. I think today's episode is going to be a really cool one. This past week has probably been one of the more interesting weeks we've had in quarantine thus far, because SpaceX just had their quote-unquote launch event on Wednesday. Now, I say quote-unquote because they had scheduled a launch event, but then they had to delay it because of the weather. Most of us probably know what SpaceX is, but just for the sake of getting things right, they are an aerospace company that deals in space exploration. Obviously, we all know who the founder is. Elon Musk created the company in 2002. SpaceX is known for being the company with the first private-funded liquid propellant rocket to reach orbit. So liquid propellants are better for rockets because the liquid is more dense, so the volume that is needed in the tank is less. So the more dense your propellant is, the less of it you need, is basically the idea. They're also the first company to send an aircraft into space to the ISS, which is the International Space Station, and they were the first company to ever reuse a rocket. Now, they were again going to make history once again this week with their first crew launching into space. Now, the mission was delayed at the last second due to the weather because apparently there were a lot of storms in the area and they also had a tornado warning. But like I said earlier, they were about to make history because this would be, I should say first that the mission is rescheduled for Saturday, which would be tomorrow, the 30th of May. And if the launch is successful, that will be the first time that SpaceX will have sent astronauts into space. Now, there are over 150,000 people that came to watch the launch live, and over 14 million people watched online. Now, SpaceX and NASA both gave multiple warnings about social distancing and urged people to watch online. They did the same thing for Saturday's launch because they want people to be cautious and prevent the spread of coronavirus. Without the pandemic, though, they expected that there would be over 500,000 people watching the launch live. Like, that's crazy. Now, this is a combined mission between SpaceX and NASA. They are using the Crew Dragon spacecraft from SpaceX, and aboard it will be 2 veteran NASA astronauts. Now, I'll just read a little bit about how the launch will go. This is coming from NASA's own website where they explain how the mission will go. Lifting off from Launch Pad 39A atop a specially instrumented Falcon 9 rocket, Crew Dragon will accelerate to its 2 passengers to approximately 17,000 miles per hour and put it on an intercept course with the International Space Station. Once in orbit, the crew and SpaceX Mission Control will verify the spacecraft is performing as intended by testing the environmental control system, the displays and current control system, and maneuvering thrusters. In about 24 hours, Crew Dragon will be in position to rendezvous and dock with the space station. The spacecraft is designed to do this autonomously, but astronauts aboard the spacecraft and the station will be diligently monitoring approach and docking and can take control of the spacecraft if necessary. After successfully docking, the 2 astronauts will be welcomed aboard station and will become members of the Expedition 63 crew. They will perform tests on Crew Dragon in addition to conducting research and other tasks with the space station crew. Although the Crew Dragon being used for this flight test can stay in orbit around 110 days, the specific mission duration will be determined once on station based on the readiness of the commercial crew launch. The operational Crew Dragon spacecraft will be capable of staying in orbit for at least 210 days as a NASA requirement. Upon conclusion of the mission, Crew Dragon will autonomously undock with the 2 astronauts on board, depart the space station, and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Upon splashdown just off Florida's Atlantic coast, The crew will be picked up at sea by SpaceX's Go Navigator recovery vessel and returned to Cape Canaveral. Demo 2, which is the name of the mission, will be the final major step before NASA's Commercial Crew Program certifies Crew Dragon for operational long-duration missions to the space station. This certification and regular operation of Crew Dragon will enable NASA to continue the important research and technology investigations taking place on board the station, which benefits people on Earth and lays the groundwork for future exploration of the Moon and Mars, starting with the agency's Artemis program, which will land the first woman in the next man on the lunar surface in 2024. Pretty cool stuff. Something I want to quickly touch on is what SpaceX has done with their reusable launch system. So they have a space shuttle called the Falcon 9 rocket. And the way it works is that when it is shot into space, it is built with multiple parts. Now, once it exits Earth's orbit, it will eject a certain part of the rocket, and that part will return to a platform in the ocean where it'll land, and then hopefully it can be reused again for the next mission. Now, this is more cost effective, and they've tried this multiple times as test runs, and SpaceX has a 98% success rate with it, which in my eyes is like near perfection. So the way it works, after it has left Earth's orbit, part of it will break off and start to fall back down. And then it uses the rocket stabilizers to stabilize and land on this little dock that will be in the ocean. Like I just said, they've done this actually multiple times. They've done multiple tests. And the first successful recovery that they had was in December of 2015. Now I'm sure a lot of us remember that. It was really cool. Now, to some people, SpaceX and NASA are seen as competitors, and I'll talk about that a little later on. But at least for the time being, NASA and SpaceX have a combined contract where they're both working on this mission. So in the past, in specifically 2006, SpaceX received a contract from NASA to deliver cargo to the ISS. Before getting this contract, they didn't have the permission to do so, but this contract allowed them to take part in missions going to the ISS. Now, granted, that contract did not allow them to send astronauts. They did not have a crew contract. This was only for cargo, for supplies, for the astronauts that were living aboard the ISS. Now, this contract is called the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services. And NASA paid SpaceX $396 million for them to work on cargo configuration. And right now their partnership continues with this latest mission called Demo 2. Looking online, it doesn't take a long time to see that a lot of people are in favor of space exploration and they think it's really cool and it's fascinating. A lot of people are above board. But then there's also the other side where people hasten to warn us that space exploration can actually be dangerous. And they look at the cost-benefit analysis and they say, based on all the risks that we are taking, it is actually not worth it to try and visit Mars, to go back to the moon. It's just not worth the risk. Now, when Elon Musk was asked why go to the moon, he explained it as such. He started off by saying that each one of his companies tries to solve a problem that the world has. So Tesla is trying to come up with a solution for sustainable energy, for reusable energy. And like that, SpaceX is trying to solve the space issue. The human race is constantly growing. Like right now, we have over 7 billion people living on Earth. And it has been stated by some people that once the population hits 9 billion, we'll start to see problems with running out of supplies and certain resources. So that's what SpaceX is trying to solve. Elon Musk is looking into a future where the human race can be a multi-planet species. So whether that's on Earth and Mars and maybe even the moon, the ultimate goal is that we can live on multiple planets so that we can outsource our materials and our resources, and there's also more space so that we ultimately have the opportunity to thrive even longer and in better ways. A big part of what Musk wants to do with, and SpaceX wants to do as well, is to get space travel cheaper. Now, this puts a lot of strain on their competitors and on the market. Again, I'll talk about the economics of space travel a little coming up. But that's ultimately what they want to do. That's part of the plan, to get more people to go on these missions, to have the public more interested and give them a little spark of hope, is to make these missions ultimately cheaper, so that the average person can go on these trips. Because what SpaceX would like to do, that in our lifetime they would like to have a city on Mars. Now, so something that came to me is that, I've heard that multiple times. I've heard that from everyone, Elon Musk wants to go to Mars or whatever. But what I was curious is what does that mean practically? How are they actively approaching this goal to get to another planet? So they've actually explained that the first step is, once they reach a point where they can go far enough and land on Mars, they want to land a miniature greenhouse about just a meter by meter length, and use that as a proof of concept as to how life would thrive on this other planet. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, obviously, you can't send humans there the first time, but first you send other forms of life, and you see how they adapt to life on Mars, and you use that as analysis for how humans would live as a society. Now, Demo 2, which is the current mission that SpaceX and NASA are working on, is the final test for their human spaceflight system, so that SpaceX can apply for the NASA certification for crew missions. So basically what that means is that if this mission becomes successful, that NASA won't be the only ones who will be sending up crews to the ISS and to other places on Mars, but now SpaceX will also be able to do so. It lays out the groundwork for future missions to the moon and to Mars and to other areas in space. And I think it's important to touch on the economics of the space race as we see it today, because SpaceX and NASA are both American companies, although NASA is federally funded and SpaceX is a private company with donors. But they're both American, and the Americans are not the only ones that are going to the space, and the space station itself, because the ISS is a partnership between the Americans and the Russians. Now, with what SpaceX is trying to do with trying to lower their flight costs, if they're able to do that, that means that they will put more pressure on the market, because now they're forcing their competition, which would be either NASA and or the Russians, to also lower their prices so they can compete with the amount of missions and the amount of cargo that SpaceX is putting up into space on a yearly basis. Now, the way SpaceX is able to do this is by working on their reusable rockets and more eco-friendly maneuvers, so that the missions don't become so cost effective, and that they can start reusing parts of their space shuttles, so that they don't need to build those materials over and over and over again for each mission. Another example would be using liquid propellants for their rockets, because like said before, it's more dense, so they use less of it, so they are not spending as much money on these propellants to fuel their rockets, essentially. Now, going a little bit away from SpaceX and going to NASA, this is actually, Demo 2 is the first crew launch mission for NASA in over a decade. Now, they could only do this with SpaceX's help, because they need the Crew Dragon, they need the space shuttle for it, which NASA hasn't been able to do for quite some time. In 2014, SpaceX won 9 of 20 internationally competed contracts, and that's where they got a lot of the permission and a lot of the grants for most of their missions that they've done in recent years, and which is one of the reasons why NASA hasn't been so successful and why SpaceX has been able to catch up in the game. If this mission goes well, SpaceX will have a giant leap in the space race as we know it today, and they will continue to evolve and change the industry for the better, as well as change things for the human race, and hopefully we will make it to Mars in our lifetime. I think that would be an awesome accomplishment. I think it's a long time overdue. You know, like the last time someone went to the moon, I think was 1972. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was 1972. And in like the past 30 years, we haven't sent anyone back there. We haven't made any major breakthroughs in like getting to Mars. So I think what SpaceX and NASA are doing is amazing. I'd say keep it up. Can't wait to see what they're doing. And I guess it's just waiting until Saturday to see. And I guess for now, we just have to wait till Saturday to see how this newest mission goes. Hopefully it's a success. I bid the astronauts good luck. Hopefully they're not harmed and everything goes successfully. And just today, SpaceX was testing a new rocket which has actually exploded on the launch pad. Now this is what I've been told completely separate from the mission that they are doing on Saturday. This was just a prototype that they have been testing. The explosion happened in Texas during a static fire testing. SpaceX was just granted an FAA license yesterday to conduct suborbital flights. They are not sure when those test flights will happen. A fourth prototype of SpaceX's next generation Starship rockets, as they are called, exploded right after they did a test at the company's South Texas test site on Friday. Shortly after SpaceX ignited the engine on the test rocket, a very large fireball engulfed the vehicle in flames, and it left very little hardware still standing, and apparently had caused damage to the test site. Now, as you all know by now, this failed test comes just one day before SpaceX is set to perform their launch of the Crew Dragon with NASA. That mission will take place in Cape Canaveral in Florida. So, two completely separate incidents. While the failure of the Starship prototype is not linked with the upcoming mission, Elon Musk did tell Aviation Week that SpaceX planned to put a pause on Starship development while the company focused on its first crewed flight. And in an interview with Aviation Week, he said that he has redirected SpaceX's priorities to be more focused on the crew launch, and that will slow things down on the Starship front. The prototype that just exploded is meant to test out on the design for SpaceX's future Starship, a giant rocket the company wants to create to send people to deep space destinations like the moon and Mars. SpaceX has been building various test versions of the Starship down at the company's worksite in Texas. Today, the company ignited the main Raptor engine on the latest Starship prototype while holding the vehicle down, a type of test known as static fire. It was the fifth static fire test SpaceX has conducted over the past couple weeks. The explosion marks yet another failure that destroyed a Starship prototype. SpaceX already lost 3 previous test versions in the past couple years of the vehicle during pressurized tests that either caused the vehicles to burst or explode. Now, this particular Starship got further along in the testing process than the others, so it wasn't entirely a failed attempt. They did get somewhere with this test, but with the latest failure, it seems unlikely that anything is salvageable. But with this latest failure, it doesn't look like anything will be salvageable because there's a pretty big explosion, and they say that some of the damage was caused to the surrounding area of the test site. We do not know, however, if anyone was hurt in the explosion. SpaceX did not respond to a request for comment before publication that is coming from The Verge. They did state, however, that it was an unmanned test, so no one was in the craft at the time. That gives us a little bit of hope. But the reason for this test was that SpaceX had plans to fly the vehicle on a low altitude flight test in the coming days. That's probably going to get delayed and pushed back because of this latest failure. The Federal Aviation Administration, as I mentioned earlier, the FAA, granted them a license to conduct suborbital reusable launch vehicle missions with the vehicle out of Texas. So that's not a very good update for SpaceX in general. And I think I'll end it on that note. I hope you guys enjoyed. As usual, let me know what you think. More episodes to come in the coming weeks. I'm currently working on getting a guest on the podcast. This is a really awesome guest. I think it will be a really interesting podcast, so stay tuned for that in the coming month or two. We'll have to see with how it goes with COVID restrictions and what the government says. I hope you guys enjoyed. Till next time.